broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the webinar we're running today called Stacks of Cyber, and which is all about why current IT security for many businesses simply just doesn't cut the mustard at the moment. So thanks for coming on. As we go through this, if anybody's got any particular questions that they want to ask, you'll have a chat box there on your GoToWebinar session. If you pop your questions into the chat, we'll be covering those off at the end. I'm joined today also by Michael DePalma from Datto. Say hi, Mike.
Hey, how are you doing?
There you go. I called him out. So between the two of us, we'll be co-presenting the webinar. We'll be running through some different bits and pieces. Let me show you now the agenda and what we're going to cover off. So first off, we'll go through our introductions. Then we're going to have a run through and discuss the current threat landscape. So that's kind of what's out there at the moment, how things are looking. I'm going to talk you through what our actual approach is to security and why traditional methods aren't working. So we're going to cover off a few things. We're going to talk about something called EDR solutions, which many of you may not have heard of, so we'll talk about what they are and how they work. And just covering off things like spam filtering, security training, and firewalls, and why all of these things are important. And then I'll pass over to Mike, and he's actually going to go through how Datto can help everybody basically with the suite of products that they have and how they help. And then at the end, we'll have a wrap up and a Q&A. So as I say, questions you can ask in the chat box and we will cover them off at the end. So very quickly, I'll cover off about one fix about us for those attendees who don't know who we are. So we are specialists in providing a fully managed IT support service for businesses. We have a typical customer base of around between 10 and 150 staff. We've got some that are a bit smaller. We've got one or two that are a little bit bigger. That's kind of our sweet spot. There's the kind of companies that we deal with. We typically manage the entire IT infrastructure, providing help desk support and supply of equipment, which means we can deliver a whole range of services for those companies that we look after. We do also work with in-house IT teams. Again, we have various clients who have teams in-house, so we can add specialist skills that they may not have within the company. So things again like business continuity, security, and all those kind of things. The way we work, we save our clients money and stress. We reduce unexpected downtime, try and manage the IT budgets and the planning accordingly, and keep them secure, which is one of the key things. And we are based in somewhere called Finchampstead, which is a leafy little village in Berkshire in the UK, tucked away in a farm office there that you can see on the screen. So, well, normally we are at the moment because of coronavirus. We're actually we're all tucked away at home, so quite a good time to get things done. So. To start with, I'm going to pass over to Michael, so we're going to do a bit of a screen swap, so give us a second. Michael will actually give us an idea of the current threat landscape and essentially what's happening within the world of security. So let me pass you over to Michael now.
All right, thank you very much, Craig. Just making sure, Craig, you could see my screen, correct?
I can. It looks white at the moment, but.
All right, hold on one second.
There we go. Now we got you.
There we go. All right, perfect. Sorry about that. My name is Mike DePalma. I am the Channel Development Manager with Datto. Just very briefly about Datto, we are a business continuity provider. We're based out of Norwalk, Connecticut, over in the States, so we're about 40 minutes outside of Manhattan. But we do have 23 offices around the world. We have now up over 1,800 employees around the world. And we protect over 560 petabytes of data worldwide. So we've got 9 data centers, 2 here in the States, 2 in Canada, 4 over in Europe, throughout Europe, and then 1 out in Australia. So one of the largest private data centers in the world. So we're not using any of the public cloud offerings. It's all data centers that we control. So I've been giving ransomware specific and cybersecurity specific presentations for about 5 years now. My role is that I'm not part of the sales team. I'm not part of the marketing team. There's actually 6 of us around the world that go around and do seminars like this. We sit on panels. We do regular lunch and learns, those type of things. And so we gain a lot of stories. We also do industry events. So we're talking to folks like Craig and his team. And I tried an experiment 2 years ago. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to see how easy it would be for me to go out and try to show how easy I can infect people, right? So these industry events, normally there's a couple hundred people. You know, we go and all the vendors get up, you know, and talk about all of our products. And what I wanted to do was I took a circuit that we do. It's called the ASCII circuit. There's 10 events every year. And in every one of those cities, what I did was I hired a model. Now, what I would do is this model would come in and give her a shirt, just says Inverse Technology, so a company that I had picked out of thin air. And my presentation, it would always be after a break, right? There's breaks in between presentations. So folks would mill around and have coffee and do some networking and those type of things. And what I would do is this model would be holding a bowl full of USB sticks that all said Inverse Technologies on it. And she would move around the room and hand out these free USB sticks. And in all 10 cities, that bowl was empty by the time I went up on stage. All right, gave out 200 of these USB sticks. Every single time that bowl was empty. So then I get up on stage and I'm doing my presentation and, you know, I'm showing some cool features and I say, you know what, I have a really cool video I want to show you guys. Our marketing team sent it to me this morning. Fortunately, I had to submit this deck about a week ago, so I just want to throw it. I threw it on this flash drive here. Hey, I'm going to hand it to my colleague. Just throw it in the back where the AV team is and plug it in. So I'd hand it to a colleague. They go run into the back, and I say, okay, wait till you see this video. All right, it's really, really awesome. Right, we do all these cool disaster demos, and we're going to show you some of this stuff in a little bit. But yeah, all you got to do is open that file. There you go. See Inverse Technologies, and now you get this room kind of looking at me like, all right, what's this guy doing? And there it is, beautiful disaster demo video. And once that button is clicked, boom, scary red screen pops up. And anybody in the room knows that this means I just got infected with ransomware. And so all these folks are in the room looking up and saying, wow, this guy from Datto flew all the way down here to Miami or wherever I was and gave himself ransomware. So now I'm scrambling, I'm yelling at my colleague, and I'm looking around the room, and I say, I just put it on that USB stick that woman gave me. And I could see you guys all have them at your desk too. I could see it right in front of you. And I know she's gone. Why is that? Because I hired her. And this isn't anything. This is just a video. He never plugged that in the back. This is just a video that I had embedded. But what if it was real? What if I had really taken a USB stick from a stranger and plugged it in and infected my network? Now, let's just think about it. It's 200 people in the room. Every one of you took it. Now, just half of you plugged it in, and I charged you $1,000. I just made $100,000 in a matter of 10 minutes. And that woman that I hired paid a few $100. She's out the door. She doesn't even know she was part of my criminal prep plan. And you wouldn't think it was me because I just got infected. And that's how easy these criminals can get in. Right? There's these spear phishing attacks where they send emails that look like every other email in your inbox, or there's these scams like this. We've seen things like this actually work. There's a big cybersecurity conference out in Vegas called Black Hat, and they did an experiment where they just put USB sticks all around Las Vegas on the floor of the casino and restaurants, and all it was doing was pinging back to say which ones were plugged in. They found that 53% of these USB sticks were plugged in. Who is picking up a USB stick in Las Vegas, of all places? Well, apparently 53% of the folks out there. So this is what we've seen. Now, ransomware specifically, we do studies on our own because we want to see the real numbers. And we've done ransomware studies in North America, out in Europe, Australia, Canada, and basically the numbers are all the same. We found that the ransomware epidemic is widespread, and it covers the entire globe. All right, about $1 billion US dollars changed hands last year between the business community and the criminals. But when you look at the actual impact that these attacks have caused, we're looking at 75 billion US dollars. So what makes this up? Well, that's because this number includes the cost of downtime, the cost of data loss, the cost of folks that never recover and go out of business. And you could find scary stats wherever you look. PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a study just a couple years ago that said that 71% of small businesses worldwide that are down for a week or more close their doors within 12 months. FEMA over here in the States, FEMA addresses all of our natural disasters. They put out a stat that said that 60% of small businesses never reopen their doors after incurring significant downtime. So really, really scary stuff. So when you look at what we're going to be talking about today, there's really two acronyms. Craig and I could sit here all day and talk about acronyms, but the two that you should walk away from this webinar with are your RPO and your RTO, and every business should be able to answer this. Your RPO is your recovery point objective, okay? Basically, how much data you're at risk of losing at any given time. Are you backing up daily? Then you're saying, okay, I'm okay with losing a day's worth of data. And that can be fine. Every business, every industry has a different RPO goal. But for the most part, people feel pretty confident they could answer that question. I talk to a lot of small businesses. Most of these folks understand that, okay, I know what my backup is. For the most part, we're testing it. If this is the only piece of leverage that these criminals have, then I'm fine. I'll never have to pay this ransom. But the star on the right-hand side of the screen is the real piece of leverage that these cyber criminals have. That's your recovery time objective. How much downtime would you incur if your systems were to go down? Would that be 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks? The business community typically cannot answer this question. So regardless of what you're using, as you finish up this webinar, go back to your office and try to figure out, can I answer those 2 questions? Do I know how long it would take me to get my data back into a production environment and get my business back up and running? Once you answer that question, say, okay, how much money would I be losing every single day if I'm down? That's a trickier question, and that's something that everybody's going to have a different answer to. But that is why people pay, because these criminals will say, okay, pay me 4,000 pounds to get your data back, or go ahead and just try to restore your data and be down for several days. How much is that going to cost? It's always going to far outweigh the cost of that ransomware app, and that's why so many people pay. And that's where the $75 billion comes from. Some of the stats over in the UK, it's pretty clear. We see that actually over in Europe, the ransomware attacks are higher than the rest of the world. They're focusing on you folks. They're focusing on the States, but the UK specifically. They saw over 75,000 never before seen malware variants. So yes, you want to have a multi-layered approach. It's extremely important. There's a lot of ways to protect your data for your infrastructure from being infected. But if something fails because there's 75,000 variants that we haven't seen before, you need to have that multi-layered approach. Assume that they're able to get through that first layer. What happens next? And then what happens next? What happens next? And when you start looking at how much money this is costing, when they're saying, okay, I want to try and go and restore from a backup, look at the type of money that was lost just recently in lost earnings for being down. That number is scalable to whatever size business you are. These are large numbers, but that number is always going to be right. That number is going to far, far exceed. Forbes just put out an article back in January talking about the average cost to a small business. Last year, about 40,000. That number has now doubled to 84,000 US dollars per attack, and this is just on the small business community. Again, the average ask is down in the few thousands. They want to put you in that position where you have to make that decision. Do I pay, or do I incur this downtime? It's going to cost my business $84,000. Right? And no industry is safe. This came from our report. Every single industry is being attacked, so don't fall into the false sense of security of, hey, listen, my data, who's coming after it? I'm a small business. I don't have any valuable information. These criminals don't care. They know that you cannot operate without your data, that they can pass this very large net. And again, the reason why folks pay is that downtime. That's what we're looking at. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Craig, and he's going to pick up where I left off, and then we're going to see a demo in just a little bit.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike.
You got it.
I've got it. Okay. Can you see my screen again now?
I can see it, yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Yeah, so what I wanted to have a quick sort of run through with everybody is kind of what the current IT security landscape looks like. Because as I say, this is what we feel potentially doesn't cut the mustard for a lot of people. And this is kind of anecdotal. This isn't gathered up from any particular list of stats. This is actually pulled together from kind of looking at the clients that we work with, the clients that we've taken on from other people, talking to people generally in the industry. But we're finding that, everybody now has some level of antivirus software. I mean, if you don't, I would say it's probably criminally negligent if you don't have anything on your machine at all to protect it. So everybody's got something there from an antivirus point of view. And kind of everybody's got some level of spam filtering, because everybody now is working on, primarily on Office 365, on G Suite. There are some people that are still working on kind of basic POP type mailboxes, but again, they've all got some level of spam filtering. So, the basic emails are being cut out. Some of the spam filters are quite good, some of them aren't, but everybody's got something there. And the same with firewalls. So, if you have an internet connection, if you're using, the internet router that your internet service provider gave you, it does have a firewall. Things aren't able to come straight through that firewall into your network. So you have got a basic, what we call a router grade firewall. So it's not very smart. It doesn't do a lot, but it does stop inbound, traffic just coming straight into your network. So kind of everybody has that, and that's what we would call a really basic level. It's better than nothing, but it's not great. Most companies then have some type of backup. You'd be surprised. I haven't put that in all companies because actually we do occasionally still come across people who have absolutely no backup at all, which is really worrying. But most companies have something. They're backing up to tape, they're backing up to USB, they might be using a backup appliance. So people have got something there. And again, most companies have got a better firewall. So people have normally got, something better than the free router that comes from the internet service provider. They might have gone out and purchased a business grade router, or they might even have a business grade firewall, or they have a Soho router, which would be a small home office router, but it's got something better than the standard firewall in there. And again, most companies have decent patch management. So Windows 10 has actually improved that a lot. So if we go back a few years, companies like ourselves, we were very, very heavy on having to do lots and lots of patching because operating systems would typically fall behind and they wouldn't patch themselves. Microsoft kind of took that slightly away from the IT community with Windows 10 by making it do these things automatically. So Windows 10 will actually update the patching for you. So most companies have some level of decent patch management for the operating system. Then we go on to what some companies have. So some companies would have security awareness training in place, which is something that we strongly recommend. They would have some DNS filtering. What that does is that means that if you or your computer tries to go and jump onto a website it's not supposed to, it would get blocked at that point. The Office 365 and G Suite backup. So again, with us working in the cloud, some companies have that backed up at the moment and they're taking backups of that. And some companies have things like fully tested DR backup solutions and third-party patch management. So third-party patch management means the applications that are not the operating system itself. So that's things like your 7-zip zip program or your Adobe Reader and those kind of things. And then very few of the companies that we've come across at the moment have full next generation firewalls. So that's a firewall that really does some really fancy stuff in terms of blocking and protecting against threats. And also very few companies have what's called EDR, antivirus security, which is something I'll go into very shortly. I don't know, some people have heard of this, some people haven't, but there's something called the Swiss cheese model. And what that is that's essentially says that you have, if you imagine a piece of Swiss cheese, like the illustration, each piece of cheese is one of your security tools. So, and the way we end up getting infected or we get threats is that essentially all the holes align at certain points in time. So the hazards are on one side, your losses are on the other. If things are if things are going against you, all those holes align and you get attacked or you get infected or you lose some money. So what do we do? How do we actually make that better? Well, in fact, what we say is more cheese is good. So you're never actually going to protect against everything and everybody. People are always going to get attacked. So the best way that you can protect and we can protect you is by actually layering up more and more and more stacks of cheese to try and make sure all of these holes don't actually line up together at the same time. So with that in mind, I thought I'd very quickly show you kind of what we would say is a really recommended security stack. So at the top level, a next generation firewall, this is the tool that will run at the endpoint of the network. So where all of your internet traffic is coming in and out, a next generation firewall will be there and it will essentially protect the network. So it will look at the kind of sites that your users are visiting and it will block out malware, it will block out pornography, it'll block out all the sort of stuff you shouldn't be doing on a corporate network, but it helps secure the network. On top of that, it will do a lot more fancy things. So it will go out there and it will look at the different IP addresses your computers are connecting to, and it will block out known threats. And so it just adds this huge layer of hardening at the start of the network. So we recommend that next generation firewall is a good place to start. On top of that, we would say layer on some spam filtering with an advanced threat protection engine. Now, so your standard Office 365 filtering, for example, doesn't have advanced threat protection. It does have a pretty decent spam filter. It's not too bad. It blocks out a lot of stuff. But the advanced threat protection adds on another layer of intelligence. So it's looking out for things like CEO fraud emails. It's checking that when you receive a web link, those web links are set with what's called a trigger. So when you go and click on that link, it doesn't let you go straight there. It actually puts it through a real-time scanning service. So that's really powerful, because what can happen is at the moment, and we see this quite a lot, is that someone will get an email that's a phishing email, and if they click the link, immediately, quite often that will go through, and you'll be able to get to a site, and you'll get infected. When you have the advanced threat protection, when you go to click that link, it will actually then go off through a service that checks that site, make sure there's no malware there that's going to get downloaded, and also that link actually then works forever. So if someone actually sends a link and your end user doesn't do anything about it for a day or two, and then they click it, again, the advanced threat protection kicks in and checks that link hasn't suddenly become malicious. So it adds a lot of kind of power on top of a standard spam filter. We then recommend EDR antivirus. So again, I'm going to go through EDR in a second, so I won't talk too much more about that, but EDR is going to make your endpoints, your actual computers, super hardened against kind of any threats that might come through that you might not know about. Then we'd layer on top DNS filtering. So DNS filtering, a bit like the next generation firewall, it's going to stop the machines from going out and talking to things that they shouldn't do. This one works on a machine level, so actually if you have a users or remote users that kind of take the laptops away, again, the filtering still works and it still stops the machines from going off to places that they shouldn't do. So it's, again, just another layer of protection. Then we've got operating system and third-party patching. So as I touched on with operating systems, that sort of things is pretty well managed, even without you having anybody looking after it. But the third-party patching is something that manually is quite a big job. So actually there's ways that can be automated, and that third-party patching just really security hardens the environment. So for any of you that are attending now that have been through something like Cyber Essentials, that process, certainly the Cyber Essentials Plus process, will involve security audits, and they will actually look at things like the third-party software on the machines and make sure that again, those are up to date and that they're patched. So third-party patching is a real easy way of kind of stopping a lot of the vulnerabilities at the start. And then we'd layer on, say, security awareness training and 2FA. So security awareness training is getting your users, your end users, trained up to spot and recognize those security threats and what they can do about them and how they stop them. And 2FA is basically what's called two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So again, a lot of you may have already experienced this when you go to, for example, your bank, and they ask you then to type in not just your password, but they might ask you for a separate security code, or they may ask you to type in a code from a device that you have. So 2FA now is becoming much more widespread. It's available on almost every web type service you have. So things like Office 365 for your email. If you enable 2FA, it does mean that if you do accidentally divulge your password or it's hacked by somebody else, when they come to use that remotely somewhere else, they can't actually get in, because your machine, your Outlook would stop them from getting in, because you'd get a pop-up on your phone saying, do you want to allow this request? And you would realize that actually it wasn't a request you made, so at that point you could block or deny that. So 2FA is really advisable, especially on anything that anything kind of management critical. So for example, if you have companies where you're running your accounts on the cloud, something like Xero or QuickBooks Online, definitely look to put 2FA on that. All of those systems have it. Your bank, you should have it on there already. It's very hard not to have a bank with 2FA. But really, any of those kind of key systems that could access anything that would divulge key information to an attacker, you want to make sure is behind 2FA where possible. So definitely something to look at. And then finally, we would say password management and dark web monitoring. So password management is a tricky one to manage for everybody, because there's so many different tools out there, and some of them are much better than others. But having a password management solution is a really good start. So making sure that your employees are not writing passwords down on Post-it notes or on notepads and putting them under the keyboard, and also that they're not reusing passwords or using a really simple password. Because again, the danger now that we're fully connected, we can all work from anywhere, which is fantastic. But that also means that then we have so much stuff on the cloud, and actually, if we're then using weak passwords to protect that, essentially it's we're opening the doors to the attackers, because they can just break through so simply. I had a look the other day, and there's a list of kind of known passwords, and I believe it's in the level now of like something like 120 billion passwords that have been breached and divulged that are known on a list. So again, if your password is a common password and it's on one of these lists, then it's pretty much, it's weak. It's available to people. So we topped that off with something called dark web monitoring. This is something we routinely do actually for everybody that we look after as a client. We have dark web monitoring in place, and what that does is that monitors the dark and dingy parts of the internet, looking out for information and credentials that have been breached for a particular company. So it looks for their domain name, so like at onefix.com. It will find anybody, any user information that's out there on the dark web that's been kind of that's been passed around for sale that they can find, and they notify us on that, and then we notify our end users. It's a little bit reactive because, again, stuff doesn't tend to end up on the dark web until it's been until it's been breached and it's been around a while. But the benefit of us kind of being able to find that and spot it is that, again, it cuts down on password reuse. We've had real life examples where we've had passwords that have been discovered on the dark web for customers that we support, and we found that those passwords are still in use within the organization. So it's a really key tool to kind of lock down and make sure people aren't reusing passwords. So talking about EDR and antivirus, what I want to do is talk to you about what EDR is, because it's a term that it's fairly new in the industry. A lot of people are not necessarily familiar with it and what it does. So what is EDR and how does it differ from a traditional antivirus? So this is a Wikipedia definition. Endpoint detection and response, EDR, also known as endpoint threat detection and response, is a cyber technology that continually monitors and responds to mitigate cyber threats. So what does that actually mean in English? It's EDR is basically a tool. It's a type of antivirus solution that will do a lot more than just antivirus. So your traditional antivirus that many of you would have and have experienced, things like Windows Defender and all these kind of normal tools, they work on a system of what's called definitions. So and again, those of you who've kind of been through something like a Cyber Essentials process would have heard the term, how often are your virus definitions updated? And what that means is essentially with a definition-based antivirus, it has this huge list of things it looks for. So it compares what you download or what you run on your computer against this big list, and it goes, have I seen this before? Yes, I have. It's in my definition list. That looks like a virus. I'll stop that from running. And that was kind of great. Go back 10 years when there wasn't so much going on in terms of all these modern threats, and it kind of worked pretty well. It's always a bit cat and mouse, because the problem is that until a new virus comes out, there's no definition for it. So, by definition, essentially everybody is going to get hit by something, and then the antivirus companies scramble around and will write something that makes their software pick that up and block it. So you're always going to have 0-day type attacks with a traditional antivirus, because the software will not understand everything that's trying to run. And then the virus companies tried to improve that, so they built in a terminology they called heuristics, where they looked at things that were running, looked at what they were doing, and this file looks like it's trying to do something a bit dodgy. I think that's a virus. So they were getting a bit smarter in what they could do. But EDR takes this a whole step further. So we use a product for our clients called Adaptive Defense 360 from a company called Panda Security. And what I've done is I've cribbed some information from Panda to run you through their definition of EDR and how that works, because it's quite useful. So here we have a comparison: traditional antivirus against Adaptive Defense 360. You could replace Adaptive Defense 360 with the word EDR or another technology. So some big ones on the market, programs like Sentinel-1, Cylance, and a lot of the big vendors are now going into the EDR space. But as I say, traditional antivirus is based on signatures. EDR is based more on behavioral intelligence, so the buzzword of big data and machine learning. But what that means is that the EDR technology is going to look at lots more about what a file does before it allows it to run. So it doesn't just look for a particular signature, it kind of interrogates and looks at what the file is trying to do to determine whether it's good or bad. A traditional antivirus will only alert on things that it knows that are bad, whereas the EDR solution will categorize everything. So the Panda solution, as a good example, will actually not let anything run. So, which sounds completely counterintuitive, but what they have is they have a list of known goodware. So essentially their cloud knows that I think it's 99.98% of the files that run on all the computers in the world are good, that they've found, and they categorize those files. So if something goes to try to run that's a brand new file, so the first time something's been written by a virus writer, they will block it. It's not allowed to run, and it gets monitored, and then their team will look at it and classify that it's good and allow it to run. So nothing can run if it's not trusted. Traditional antivirus will only detect known malware. The EDR solution will protect against all types of threats, so it's known and unknown malware, APTs and fileless attacks, and other types of malware behavior. And where that works and where the EDR steps in on this is that actually one of the key exploits we start to see now is we see known pieces of good software being then manipulated to be bad. So where we typically, if we roll back to your traditional antivirus model, we would have something like Outlook, and Outlook is going to be trusted. The software says Outlook's good, I'm going to allow Outlook to do what it needs to do. Well, if Outlook suddenly starts trying to, encrypt files on your network, well, that's not good. It shouldn't be doing that. But your traditional antivirus typically can't see that or doesn't understand that that's happening. Whereas again, your EDR type solution is looking at what the process is doing. So it's looking at saying, well, hang on, Outlook's going to your file server and starting to encrypt files. I think Outlook may have been compromised. I'll stop that from running. So it just steps things up another level. So your traditional antivirus, basic protection, your EDR solution, prevention, detection, and remediation. So the remediation part being that the software itself can roll things back or repair things that are damaged. Again, in theory, if it's doing the job properly, you shouldn't need to do too much remediation at all, because nothing that's not known should be allowed to run. Your traditional antivirus will offer no information about the type of attack, whereas an EDR solution will typically have forensic tools built into there. So again, the software will be looking at what your file that you downloaded from Dropbox is trying to do. So you go to run an executable and it will say, oh, well, that executable came from Dropbox and now it's being used to copy files from the network to another place on the internet. That doesn't look good. So you can start to pull forensic data to essentially to mitigate the threat, but also if you do have a breach, then that information can be used to help recover. And finally, traditional antivirus will stop known malware getting to the endpoints, but it doesn't monitor the processes and what's happening. So this is what I was saying about like the Outlook example. So your EDR solution will have complete comprehensive endpoint visibility of what's going on with all the software on there. And that sounds quite heavy duty, but actually these products are actually run in a very lightweight way. So they're typically no heavier than a standard antivirus. They don't typically, again, slow the machine down in any way. They can be a little bit more work from an admin point of view to make sure that things are not being run that shouldn't be run. But essentially they are, they do work very well from that point of view. So the question, one of the things that I've been asked by quite a few people when I've gone through these kind of presentations is, what threat should you worry about the most? There's all these things out there. What is the thing that you need to most worry about? And we would say it's the end users. It's those people sitting, essentially the person in between the keyboard and the chair. The reason being, again, if we look at a prime example, I've got, here's an email that came through, and literally today, you can see from the screenshot that I've grabbed that this happened, 45 minutes before we started the webinar. I thought I'd snip it quickly and put it in. Here's an example of a spam email that I've unblocked from my spam folder, but it's the kind of thing that your users will be getting. This one doesn't look particularly great, to be fair. It's quite obviously a scam, but you will get someone who'll click it, and you'll get someone that will click that email, they'll click on that view messages link, and they'll go and type their password in, and at that point, then they've opened up the door to your network or to your files and data. So your users are the biggest point of weakness. So the users are the biggest hole in that cheese slice that we talked about earlier on. So what can we do about that? We can try and shrink the hole. So we typically would say we shrink the hole with security awareness training. And the training should teach people how to spot phishing emails. So they should know what a phishing email looks like. And surprisingly, some of these things now are getting really, really good. We've, even from our point of view, we've had emails through recently that you look at and you really have to try hard to spot that it's not a genuine email. So these things are getting more and more comprehensive. So teaching users how to try and spot those is really key. Users should have an understanding of CEO fraud. For those of you on the webinar that don't know what CEO fraud is, I'd encourage you to go and Google it. But essentially, if you're working in a corporate, you'll probably have seen this already. It's the scenario where you get an email that pertains to be from the managing director or the finance director or the CEO asking for money to be transferred or asking for you to respond to a particular email. So again, typically these are not tremendously advanced and they are easy enough to spot. But again, if you've had something like a compromise and actually someone's within the network, this is then much harder to spot, and it becomes a tool that people will use to try and extort money. So again, this can be managed with training and also managed with process, so making sure that there's a process for signing off on large payments or authenticating new suppliers or change of supplier bank accounts, those kind of things. Training should also teach you how to practice safe computing. So for remote workers, how do we connect to the company network? How do we do that safely? Michael was saying about the USB sticks that get picked up and plugged in. Again, we would really advise that most people should try and look at blocking USB sticks. It can be difficult because some companies have a reason that they do need to use them. But again, if there's USB sticks in place, are they encrypted? Because if the data goes walkabouts, then who's looking after that? And are we using trusted devices and all these kind of things? So there's a whole load of education around safe computing and how you can do that. And the training should also, this is the hardest thing really, the training should teach people how to kind of be alert to anything that's odd. So anything that's slightly out of the ordinary, you're better to have users that overreact and actually report those things rather than not reporting it or clicking on the links or doing something silly. And the training should also test users regularly. And this is really important because you can do a level of training and then if people aren't paying attention, it just slips away, and that kind of interaction level drops back, and people don't implement what they've learned. So if we can test users regularly, we can use that process to then improve those staff members, and actually we can have human interaction. So a good security awareness training program will identify those people that need a little bit of personal help, essentially, so that we can help them out. So then what if the worst does still happen? What if we do all of this stuff and we still get an attack? Well, prevention is better than a cure. So actually, if we can prevent these things from happening, that's ideal. However, having a cure is better than having no cure at all. So what is the cure that we can use? So we need to make sure we've got a full backup of all the systems that we've got business data on. So again, when we finish the webinar, have a look, think about what you've currently got business system-wise. How's that backed up? And this isn't just the servers, because that's the obvious part. This is all of your business systems. So if you're thinking about cloud computing, what have you got backed up there? If you're thinking about cloud accounts, do you take a backup of that? You need a backup that you can bring live quickly. And this is something that Mike's going to cover off very shortly, but backup and business continuity are two different things. You can have a backup, but your backup could take you 12 hours to restore. And this is what we're saying about RPO and RTO. And a backup that takes a long time to restore, well, it's still a backup and it's still useful, and that might fit your objectives, but I would suggest you have a look and decide how long you can afford to be down for, and whether that fits your needs. Lastly, backup of your SaaS platforms, because this is kind of crucial. So if you're using things like 365 and you're using G Suite, making sure you've got those platforms backed up, because as more data moves to the cloud, it becomes more a risk if it isn't backed up. I said lastly, actually, this is lastly backup of key endpoints. So this one's a little bit trickier. It's quite hard to implement an endpoint backup really on everything. It's not impossible, it can be done. But actually, typically you'd want to have a look and think about your key endpoints. So this might be you've got an account system that's in-house, something like Sage Accounts or QuickBooks that's on the PC, and you want to make sure that that's backed up, because that's crucial, because if that's not available, you can't do your end of month invoicing. Or if you've got a point of sale system, how do you get that back up very quickly? So key endpoint backup is also really important. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Michael, and he's going to talk about how we do that sort of stuff. So over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. You guys can see my screen okay? I know a couple questions came in saying that my voice is a little fuzzy, so I apologize about that. We are right outside of New York, so we're all quarantined and working from home, so I will try to talk slow and hope that it works all right. So Craig mentioned kind of the evolution of technology in general, right? At first, you saw what an antivirus has really evolved to on the EDR system. Luckily, backup has evolved as well. So backup has evolved from that traditional file and folder level backup to what's called business continuity. And this has really been the shift throughout the world in order to do a couple of things, not just combat these criminals on the cybersecurity side, but make sure that your business can run regardless of what's going on. Obviously, think about what we're going through now. So let's take a look at what business continuity looks like, all right? First and foremost, you want to have a hybrid approach. You want to make sure you've got an on-premise backup for the very quick restores, those type of things, but also an offsite sync. I mentioned those various data centers that we have around the world. This is critical as well. There's plenty of times where at any given time we have anywhere between 200 and 500 businesses around the world operating their full operations out of our data centers for various reasons. So you want to make sure you have multiple copies of your data in different geographical locations, so that no matter what's going on around you, you have a safe copy of your data. And that's very critical. All right. You want to make things automated. Craig mentioned, right? It's usually the guy sitting between the computer and the chair that makes the mistakes. 91% of data loss and downtime is due to user error. And that's not normally maliciously somebody within the organization doing something. It's somebody clicking on a button they're not supposed to, going to the wrong website because they haven't been trained. So you want to take the user error out of it as much as possible. So again, you'd be sitting down with Craig, you'd say, okay, what do I need my RPO goal to be? Is it hourly? Okay, let's set that schedule. Hourly during business days and hours, perfect. All right, that's where we're backing up our data. It's happening automatically. The testing is happening automatically too. I talk to small businesses, again, around the world about their backup solution. Most folks can answer the question of how often are you taking the backups? But then when you get the next layer and say, okay, how often are you testing them and who is responsible for testing them? You start to see a lot of finger pointing. Nobody tends to know. So you want to make sure that the testing of those backups is automated as well. Hopefully you see all these pretty green dots and everything's moving along smoothly, but maybe there is a failure. Maybe there's an X and there's a backup failure. Well, now you can go in and proactively address this instead of finding out that your backups have been failing for 3 weeks, and now that star that we looked at on the RPO side just jumps from 1 hour to 3 weeks. You want to make sure that those are all being tested both locally and to make sure that that data has moved off site successfully as well. So all of that, different copies of your data, different geographical locations, is constantly being tested. Now, the way that the backups are being taken is vastly different as well. Traditional backup, the kind of commoditized backup that most businesses are using, it's backing up files and folders. Whatever files and folders you're telling it to, for the most part, it's doing a good job at that. What business continuity does, and Datto specifically, is we take an entire image of that server. So we're not just capturing the files and folders, but also the operating systems, the applications. Everything that lives on that server is now mirrored over to that on-premise device and then subsequently sent off to the data centers. All right, so now we've captured everything. Now what that allows us to do is once we have that base image of everything that lives on that server, you set up your schedule, and all we're doing is taking block level incremental changes. So we're not taking another full base image every time. We're just taking a backup of the changes that occur. And what this allows us to do is what's called inverse chain technology. This is something that's proprietary to Datto. We're the first to do this. And what it means is that every single one of these backups is independent of one another. So if you are infected at 11 o'clock in the morning, you can roll back to 10 o'clock and there's no risk of that previous backup being impacted. Whereas traditional backups tend to be layered upon previous backups, every one of these data points is independent of one another. That's critical. You could just wipe out the infected backup. But ultimately, what does this give us the capability to do? Well, that's to virtualize. And what this means is this represents a workstation. It gets the scary red screen that we talked about, and now it's migrated to your servers, and now your server is encrypted. Well, it's just a call over to Craig and his team, and he spins up what's called a virtual machine, meaning everybody in your office that was operating off of that server is now operating off of this on-premise device. It's actually operating as your server, and it's a true production environment because remember, we've got the operating systems, we have the applications. Most folks in your office aren't even going to know this failover occurred at the local level. Okay, so you could be in this virtualized state for 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks even, and you're taking active backup, so it's a true production environment. So when you are ready to do that restoration, you're going to be able to get back not to where you were when an attack occurred, but rather where you were when you were ready to do that restoration. You could actually start that migration while you're still in the virtualized state. So again, before you even start looking at the recovery, before you start looking at that RTO and okay, we got to get this data back, right? First and foremost, get your systems back up and running. Make sure that you can reduce that downtime because remember, this is the costly part. Is the downtime. This is why people are paying. So now you're talking about minutes or hours instead of days or weeks. Also, you're going to be able to answer those RTO and RPO questions. You're going to know because they're being tested. These cool virtualization capabilities are being tested every day as well. Your systems are brought up in the background all the way to a boot screen. A snapshot is taken, and you could see the timestamp. You could see that that virtualization has been tested as well. And you have the capabilities of doing this either locally or from the data center as well. So if something were to go down, maybe you do have a fire or flood and everything's down on premise, well, now you can operate out of that data center as well. And we were talking about endpoint protection. That's very critical right now. There's a cloud continuity solution that Datto offers that is actually an image-based solution for those endpoints, where those endpoints can now be backed up to the cloud. The bare metal restore capability is available. So if something were to go wrong, you can get everything back onto a new piece of hardware. So that's another thing to look at, especially again with what we're going on right now. Now, Craig mentioned, SaaS applications. Datto, we use G Suite. A lot of folks are using O365. Why do you need to protect that? Why is that important? Well, there's actually a virus out there called Ransomware. There's actually a vast amount of these viruses. You don't hear as much about them because right now there's still so much low-hanging fruit on the on-premise side of things. But yes, there are viruses out there that will go and try to attack your domains on the SaaS application side. There is somebody, if you want to go Google him after this, his name is Kevin Mitnick. He at one point was on our FBI's most wanted list, one of the most wanted cyber criminals in the world back in the 90s. He was caught. He went to jail. He came out. He turned to the good side, started working with the government. He also is on the board of a couple of those training companies. But he came to our worldwide conference last year, and he performed a demo. He had 2 laptops open. Within 5 minutes, he showed a ransom cloud virus that he created himself. And so email comes in, looks like every other email, right? Just says, okay, you got to update your anti-spam pro. Looks pretty legit, right? Okay, the next screen, you just click accept. And once you click that accept button, every single email is now encrypted. And the only email you can open is that scary red screen from Kevin that says, okay, pay me my money in Bitcoin and I'll unencrypt all of your data. Now think about that. Think about if that were to occur. This is why you need to back it up. Oh, go open an agreement from your O365 contract or your G Suite contract. They will not guarantee that they can get your data back. There's a reason why Microsoft offers a backup solution, because they know that you need a backup solution. And if you go to their forums and you go to their user agreement, they actually let you know that you should have an external backup for their products as well. So what does that look like on the SaaS protection side? All right, so here you go. We're going to click on an email here. Here's my critical files. Everything has been now encrypted. All right, go to the recycle bin. Everything is encrypted. There's nothing that you can open. Okay, here's the scary guy that comes up. Your files have been encrypted, right? Your photos, videos, documents, everything. Pay me my money. All right. So if you were to go into that O365 backup, it's very simple to get your data back. All right. You're going to have a separate folder that shows that your OneDrive in this instance is being backed up. You're going to click restoration to restore. There it is. There's your Backupify restoration. The Backupify is the product behind what we're doing here. You're going to be able to see the next step right here, critical data, and your systems are going to be back up and running. All of those data, all that data is going to be back up. You can see it was modified a few seconds ago, and you're back up and running. All of that stuff that you had been encrypted or you lost, maybe you just accidentally deleted a file, you're able to go and do that as well. So wherever your data lives, criminals are going to try to go and attack it. And so it's very critical that every piece of your data is protected so that you're not only taking care of that RPO side of the screen, but also that RTO side, the recovery time objective. Okay, this is what you're trying to do. And this is why it's important to work with a third-party managed service provider to make sure that all of these systems are in place. So with that, I am going to turn things back over to you, Craig. All right, let me just see a little. Computer is frozen. Okay, here we go. I will turn it back over to you, and we will start to wrap things up.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. So what we'll do in a second, we'll go through a quick Q&A. I think we've got a couple of bits that have come through privately in terms of questions. And then what I want to do also is talk about what we can do to help you guys out. So one of the things we can offer straight off the bat from what Mike was saying, obviously we kind of gave us a screenshot run through there of the way the different Datto solutions work. we can quite happily organise up a free DR demo for you. So if you'd like to see the solution in kind of in more detail, really see the bones of it, that's very easy to arrange. We can get that sorted out for you. I'd like to offer anybody a free security audit. So anybody that's attended or watches this on a recording, drop us a line. My details are there on the screen now. Happily go through and have a look at what you're currently doing, what you've got, maybe what's missing, do a bit of a gap analysis. I know some of the people on the webinar are clients as well. That applies for you as well, because again, depending on what kind of plan you're on with us, some of the stuff we talked about, maybe on a plan that you're not on, or maybe something you don't currently have at the moment. So we'd happily have a look and see where you're at, make sure that you've got everything you need. And also, once we finish on the Q&As, I've also got Datto very kindly provided us with a Google Home and a Datto rucksack that we are able to give away to somebody that's on the webinar today. So I've got the names here, so I'll do a draw in a second and pull those out the hat. But to start with, actually, I've got a question here for Michael. I mean, you kind of mentioned it, so it kind of covers a bit of it. But one of the things that someone's asked is why do they actually need to have the SaaS protection side of things in terms of their data's on the cloud, they've got cloud stuff there. It looks like there's some level of restore available from Microsoft or from Google. What do they get essentially if they take something like a Datto solution for disaster recovery of the cloud?
Yeah, well, if you look at either one of the agreements, either G Suite or O365, they have what's called the shared responsibility model, which means that yes, they will protect the integrity of the cloud, but the data within that cloud is the responsibility of the tenant, so you. I actually sat on a panel up at the Burlington, Massachusetts headquarters of Microsoft. And I sat on a panel, I was sitting next to a senior engineer, and she said that exact piece. She said, everyone in the audience bears a responsibility here to make sure your data is protected. Again, they basically promoted it right there. And you can go and look at, again, forums or even speak to folks at Microsoft, and they will tell you that it is important. Data that is deleted sits in the mailbox for 30 days. Also, if you look into the agreement, there's typically a limit on the amount of documents that you can restore. It seems like a lot. I think it's 10,000 or something like that. But you think about the emails that you have throughout your entire company. So yeah, there's a large reason, and again, we're not talking about a large amount of money. So it is extremely important to make sure that you're backing up that data as well.
Fabulous, makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, there's this one looks like it's coming in for you, Craig. What is the most common vulnerability that you see when you're doing a network assessment on a new client?
That's a good question. So one of the things I think one of the biggest things we've seen, and we've seen a lot of it recently, is where clients have actually opened up things like remote desktops. So the ability to work remotely, and they've opened that up on a server, and they've just forwarded through kind of communication to that server to allow people to work remotely, but not with any kind of VPN protecting that. So they've had people literally kind of connecting to their office IP address to be able to get onto a remote desktop to be able to work. And sure, it works, but we've seen a huge rise in the amount of kind of automated attacks against those remote desktop ports, and it's been a really big way of people getting compromised and things like these ransomware attacks coming in, where people, they run automated scripts against these kind of servers, they wait and they try and break in, and then once they're in, they sit in the background and they will get on and encrypt everything. So I think the biggest lesson there, I mean, that's something we typically pick up in a network security audit, but the big lesson there, I think, is to make sure that, again, anything that opens up the keys to the office essentially is behind something like a VPN, because anything that's publicly accessible now is just going to get hammered away by these automatic bots trying to break in. So that's what we've seen a lot of. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. Well, I think that pretty much brings us to the end. What I'll do is we've got this Google Home and Datto rucksack to give away, and I can say that the name that's pulled out from my virtual hat here from my random number generator is Hazel Tiffany. So Hazel, that will be on its way to you. I'll drop you an email afterwards to get your contact details to get that sent over. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. The other wrap up I want to say is we're actually, whilst we're all kind of quarantined for coronavirus at home, we're going to be doing a few more of these webinars. So from a OneFix perspective, we will have a webinar running Next Wednesday, I'll send some details out, but this one we'll do some Teams training. So we're actually going to be doing some specific training around Microsoft Teams, how you can use that and how it can improve your working from home workflow. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be sticking it all over social media and sending emails shortly. But again, thanks everybody for your attendance. Thanks very much, Mike, for helping me out with this one. It's been fantastic to have you on board.
Thank you so much for including us as well, and good luck, everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Take care, everybody. Cheers.